Ladies and gentlemen, fight fans all around the world, let's talk some boxing. So we're talking Floyd Mayweather TBE. And this article here is one that is very, shall we say, ubiquitous or popular amongst so-called boxing historians and aficionados. And I'm just here to set the record straight somewhat, but it does share their opinions. This person says Ali, Mayweather, and Marciano are not the true greatest of all time. This article was written March 30th, 2016 by Jaime Ortega, who is someone who is an analyst and commentator for boxing. He says the 50s and down was unquestionably, I think he wants to say, the best era in boxing history. I am a fan of old school boxing and an admirer of competitiveness. I watch endless tapes of old boxing and hold a nice collection. I'm not against boxing today, but I think we completely overrate boxers today, especially comparing them to boxers in the past. Simply not true. I wanted to stop right there and say this is going to be his argument, and this is a shared sentiment by a lot of people who actually look to the old school times and says those were actually the best times of boxing. Okay? Some of them are people who existed in some of those eras and actually participated in some of the events, and other people never were in those eras. This gentleman, Jaime Ortega, is commenting on recent boxing history versus older boxing history. To name either Muhammad Ali, Rocky Marciano, or Floyd Mayweather Jr. the best ever or even top 10 is simply laughable to absurd, especially the last two. A lot of old school boxing aficionados crown Cassius Clay the greatest pugilist of all time based on his record to overcome losses and prove non-believers and haters wrong when branding himself greatest of all time. Yes, Sonny Liston, Joe Frazier, George Foreman, and Henry Cooper were tough cookies, no doubt. But his losses against Ken Norton, Larry Holmes, and Leon Spinks lack enough credentials to consider Ali a top 10 fighter. He also lost against Larry Holmes. You just said that twice? Why did you? Ali did not dominate. He overcame challenges. But as I will explain later, he lacks in other departments to be considered a top 10 boxer. Out of the three I will discuss, Muhammad Ali was no doubt the one who fought tougher opponents. He could make top 20. The amount of assumptions put here is it's just remarkable. Let's just put it that way. But it is what it is. And it shows sometimes how much people do not understand how much the sport of boxing has evolved and how much it has come a long way and how much more developed boxers are today than in the past. But I'll address all of these things in the points below, okay? So I'm not going to go through the entire article because that makes no sense. You can always read the article yourself. It's on Boxing 24 and you just type in the headline. But suffice it to say that I'm going to address his points of why Marciano, Ali, who is the greatest of all time as far as I'm concerned, and Floyd Mayweather, who I consider the best boxer of all time, at least the best boxer I've ever seen, why he thinks that these guys are not top 20, top 10, okay? Now, first of all, let me just simply summarize this paragraph here. He says that, first he said that Ali, he was beaten by notable names, and he repeated Larry Holmes, who is an all-time great, But now with Rocky Marciano, he says that Rocky Marciano didn't fight guys who were either in their prime or they weren't guys who were in his weight division. Okay, that's his basic argument here. When it comes to Floyd Mayweather, he says that he acknowledges him as his defense, but he said that he was boring when he beat Corrales and Pacquiao and Alvarez, and that his 49-0 record really doesn't qualify him to be in the top 10 greatest boxers of all time. So now he gives the reasons why he thinks not only Mayweather and Ali, but a lot of the modern fighters after the 1950s are not to be ranked with fighters before the 1950s. His first argument is that the boxers of the 1920s to the 1950s had an incredible amount of fights under their belt. The average boxer of that era fought 12 to 17 fights per year, many breaking over 100 and others breaking over 200 fights. This is tremendous fight pace for any current boxer to undergo. In fact, no boxer today that I know of takes more than 5 fights per year. If Marciano, Floyd, or Ali would have fought that excessive amount of pro fights in their careers, not only would they have felt overwhelmingly stressed with non-stop action, leaving significant signs of wear and tear, but their undefeated streaks would have been easily evaporated. I don't care who it is, but any boxer can tell you that it takes a special boxer to fight 12 to 17 pro fights per year. That no longer existed. So his first argument is numeracy. Now, what this guy fails to actually state is that you're not fighting 12 to 17 fights per year against high caliber competition. In fact, the majority of those fights and the competition faced is low caliber. Guys could come off the street and fight you. That's how it used to be. So that when you look at Sugar Ray Robinson, Willie Pep, you look at Harry Kreb, you look at Sam Langford and all these other guys, they were facing boxers who had sometimes no fights on their record. Sometimes they had 10, 12 fights on their record, but you know, Langford and they had more fights. Okay? My point being this: boxing was very popular back then, so a guy could come off the street and fight you. You know, a lot of those records, just like Julio Cesar Chavez, were padded records, to be quite honest with you. And these guys, instead of having sparring, they had a lot of stay busy fights in between the major fights. In fact, the major fights, they usually had fights against really good competition. They had basically 2 to 3 to 4 fights per year of that kind of thing. In fact, more on average, when you average it out, it's usually 2 fights per year. And that's what the the very recent modern form of boxing has. You usually have 2 major fights per year. You cut all of the stay busy fights and you just have those major fights instead of just doing all these different fights. And by the way, all of these different fights, some of them will take place in the street. It'll just be arranged spontaneously. Sometimes they occurred in clubs. So that what the very recent modern form of fighting has now is what we call sparring. Now, I'm not saying that sparring didn't happen back then too, but guys fought so regularly that, you know, sparring wasn't the major thing. Nowadays, sparring is the major thing. And what you see in sparring matches and so on, I mean, it makes up for all of those things that people actually went to see. Okay, those pro fights. So instead of fighting lower tier competition, which you could just beat a whole bunch of them, you could take on 2, 3 of those guys in a night. Instead of doing that, what guys do now is they have bigger mega fights, and they leave the experience and so on to sparring, which is a much more controlled environment. Also, very important for people to understand is that boxers have become stronger and they are much bigger. Back in the day, we had same-day weigh-ins, so guys came in more or less around the weight of their weight class and their maximum limit. Today, boxers come in on fight night way above that, sometimes 15 to 20 pounds above their weight class. So it's a totally different story. And because they're so much bigger and they're much faster and much quicker, with more power, they have the propensity to hurt each other even more. Okay, let's talk about round average. Here's his next point. So his next point is round average. He says, another problem ranking modern boxers comes with the short round per fight average compared to past fights. During the 1920s to 1950s, 15 to 20 round fights were normal, whereas today we only have 12. And he basically is saying that the conditioning of the fighters was such that you had to have good conditioning. So even if you had a very skilled fighter facing you, if he didn't have good conditioning, you could beat him that way, right? So this is his basic argument. Now, what he doesn't understand is, take for instance, you have a marathon runner. He's not going to go at top speed from the beginning of the fight, the race. He's going to build up his speed gradually, and then in the final mile of his race, he's going to be at top speed through that mile. But to go to the other extreme, a sprinter must build up to top speed as quickly as possible in a race he's running, especially like a 100-meter dash. The shorter the race, the faster the pace. It's the same thing with boxing. Boxing came from unlimited rounds to 40 rounds to 20 rounds, now to 12. It was 15 and 12. And sometimes, in some cases, 10. What's very interesting is that the shorter the amount of rounds means the faster the pace of fights. Fights today are at a dizzying pace compared to fights of the early times, the 1920s to the 1950s. There's a lot of clinching in the 1920s to 1950s. It's the breaks in the action. There's some explosive points. But for the most part, it's a battle of attrition. There's a lot of holding, clinching. I mean, people talk about fights today being boring. You just need to go watch some of those throwback fights. But people were so enthused by boxing because it was the major sport of the day. There wasn't a lot of competition by other sports that people really were into boxing like that, so they didn't mind it. So pacing is one thing. The other thing is, a lot of people don't know the conditioning of athletes today. If you take a Sean Porter, for instance, and you put him in the ring with anybody, he could keep a frenetic pace for more than 12 rounds. He can go 20 rounds, 40 rounds, 60, 80, probably 100 rounds at that frenetic pace, because his conditioning is such, and the science into Sean Porter now is such like that. Floyd Mayweather, he'd go 5-minute rounds, 7-minute rounds sometimes. Nobody's keeping track of the round. The round ends whenever Floyd Mayweather Jr. wants it to end, which would be like 45 minutes to an hour sometimes. My point being, no water break, none of that, just going at it. But those are extreme things, okay? Even back in the day, people didn't do that. My point being this: just because the actual fights are 12-round fights doesn't mean that the athletes don't condition themselves to go beyond 12 rounds so they can have the optimal performance for 12 rounds. And we're talking a frenetic pace compared to back in the day. So I very easily debunk this numeracy argument once again, because once again, this guy is not factoring into the equation pace and the fact that the conditioning of athletes today for 12-round fights is just on a whole other level to the conditioning of athletes back in the day. The things athletes go through today, I mean, you have no idea. Let's just put it that way. All right, let's go to the third point he's trying to make, which is lack of tape. He's saying that basically there's no tape of fighters back in the day. You just went in and faced the fighter you had to face, and you had to figure them out in the ring. And it's still the same today, actually. It's still the same. It's just that sometimes your coach may look at tape. But take, for instance, especially in the early pro fight career of fighters, they don't know nothing about the fighter they're about to fight. There's no tape on them. They just go in and fight them. As you go to higher levels, sometimes they look at tape and they study tape on fighters. But it's not something that you can just rely on, because from fight to fight, fighter fights differently, the different styles that they have to fight. So it doesn't really matter. You have to prepare for everything. So when you're training for a fight, you prepare for all different situations, all different styles. Still, you do that because you have to improve your craft. It's what you bring to the table that's important, not what your opponent does. So, his point is kind of, let's put it this way, it shows his ignorance of the sport of boxing. All right. Like I said before, you know, a lot of things are counterintuitive about boxing. So you can see this guy is pretty much speaking from a fan's point of view. He doesn't really understand what boxing is about. When we look at competition, he's saying that in the throwback times, there was a lot more people interested in boxing because it was the main sport. There was no competition for it. There was no MMA, no Bruce Lee, no other martial arts forms, you know, in competition. He's right, but so he said a lot of people more involved in boxing. As a result of that, he cites some things that I find very interesting. He talks about Sugar Ray Robinson, that he fought Henry Armstrong. And he's saying that Henry Armstrong is a better fighter than any fighter that Ali, Frazier, or Floyd Mayweather Jr. beat. In fact, he cites specific fighters like Ali versus Frazier, because Frazier kind of defined Ali. Marciano versus Ezzard Charles, because Ezzard Charles was kind of still in his prime. And Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao, who were the two greatest boxers of their era. Now, the thing that he's leaving out is that Henry Armstrong was washed up when he faced Sugar Ray Robinson. And actually, if you guys know the story, Sugar Ray Robinson was trying to give Henry Armstrong a paycheck in exchange for getting Henry Armstrong's legacy on his resume. But it wasn't a competitive fight, you know. Now, why I say this is because when Ali faced Frazier, Frazier was extremely competitive because Frazier was in his prime and was world champion. When Marciano faced Ezzard Charles was a former heavyweight champion the fight before. He had just been defeated by Jersey Joe Walcott. When Floyd Mayweather beat Manny Pacquiao was a world champion, the WBO welterweight world champion, and number 2 pound-for-pound fighter in the world when Floyd faced him. You just don't compare Henry Armstrong to what Ali faced, what Marciano and Floyd faced, when you know Armstrong was washed up. Yeah, Armstrong was a hell of a fighter. He's the only fighter in the history of boxing to have 3 world titles in 3 different divisions simultaneously. A great feat on his part. Constantly fighting guys bigger than him. The ultimate small guy. But don't make it sound like Sugar Ray Robinson beat a Henry Armstrong at the top of his game. That didn't happen. But Ali did when he faced Frazier. Marciano did when he faced Ezzard Charles. And Floyd did when he faced Pacquiao. You got to put this thing in context, bro. Now, the other thing about it is, when you scrutinize him, see, he can't pull the wool over my eye. He talks about, you know, Danny Moyer and Ralph Jones being very capable guys to outscore Sugar Ray Robinson. What he continuously leaves out of that equation is that Sugar Ray Robinson fought a lot of bums in between those fights and at the end of his career. A lot of bums. Okay? And that's the thing that he's leaving out. He's talking about Danny Moyer, who later became super welterweight champion when the super welterweight division was introduced, both WB and WBC super welterweight champion. He's talking about Ralph Jones, who was a highly avoided fighter. Ralph Tiger Jones was an excellent fighter. Okay? And they didn't just outpoint Sugar. Well, Ralph Tiger Jones was the real deal. Sugar Ray Robinson just never faced him. Okay? We have Charlie Burley. We have a ton of them. Okay? Who were great boxers. Sugar Ray Robinson didn't face. Right? But he did face a number of bums. And don't get it twisted. They were bums. They were exactly what they were. People don't talk about that. The other thing is, he just talked about there were longer rounds in fights. Well, guess what? Sugar Ray Robinson fought mostly 10-round fights most of his career. What are you really saying? Just saying. Now, nobody says that Danny Moyer, Carmen Basilio, and Randy Turpin were not good fighters. I don't consider Randy Turpin an all-time great. He was good in England, but he didn't beat nobody. That was a real note, okay? The only person he beat was Sugar Ray Robinson. That's the only noteworthy name he got. He don't got no Danny Moyer. He don't got no Basilio. He don't got no Kid Gavilan. He got none of the all-time greats are on his resume. The only all-time great he got on his resume was Sugar Ray Robinson, right? Period. Now, that's not to knock Randy Turpin, but he won all that. Okay? Ralph Tiger Jones was better than him because Ralph Tiger Jones got names on his resume. I'm just saying. You ask me who Randy Turpin beat. You can't tell me who he beat, can you? Right? And he was a good boxer. He gave Sugar Ray Robinson problems because the style was such that it had pretty decent defense, and he still could count upon Sugar Ray Robinson, which is why I thought Sugar Ray Robinson would be beaten by Charlie Burley, but that's a whole other story for another day. My point anyway is this. He constantly talks, his arguments are usually on numeracy. You know that these fighters from the throwback times fought any and everybody and guys off the street. That's where we get cab drivers from and bums, right? So that the quality of competition back to back was never high. As boxing evolved, the competition back to back became higher, and we had levels in boxing. This is where we got the debutantes, and then the prospects, then the contenders, then we had the champions, then we have the legendary fighters. Okay, this is where it came from. But in the early forms of boxing, it's just anything went until it started to have organization. And the problem with that is this: a guy would fight a bum, and then he'd rematch the bum for no reason. There's no best of three. The bum didn't beat him, nothing like that. He just rematched the dude, and he rematched the dude like 5 times for the year. Numeracy. So when you look at Sugar Ray Robinson's 219-6, I don't know where he got these figures from anyway, and Armstrong's 181, 21, and 10, a lot of that is padded with guys in between, what we call stay busy fights. Because when you break it down, Sugar Ray Robinson and Henry Armstrong fought not more than 22, 23, maybe 25, maybe 27 notable opponents, or good enough opponents, decent opponents. So out of them 200, 181 fights, you only fought like at most 27 notable opponents. Okay, don't even talk about how many times you rematched them, whether it was worthy, whether you needed to rematch them. And again, this all happened because dude be fighting everybody. So when you fight everybody and you exhausted everybody that's out there, now you gotta fight bums. Now you gotta rematch dudes because you fought everyone. You just fought everyone. Nowadays, people build their resumes and they fight people as they become more and more legendary. Right? That's how the system is built. Just saying, so you guys know. So his argument about competition is pretty much debunked, because the level of competition is what counts, as any old school fighter will tell you, or old school trainer. It's who you beat, who you fought. Let's move on. Now he talks about taking on multiple weight classes and divisions. Well, we all know, he goes all the way back to 1823. We all know that that's really rare, you know. Now he talks about a couple things. 1, he talks about catch weights. 2, he talks about there were originally 8 divisions. And 3, he talks about the fact that you know, that guys used to fight, you know, like I guess Henry Armstrong, they used to fight multiple weight classes. Now the truth be told, that was rare. That wasn't so common. Guys would fight sometimes a weight class above them because they were too big for their weight class. Only for championship fights they'd come back down to fight in that weight class. All right, that's what used to happen. Catch weights happened all the time. In fact, weight classes changed a lot. Sometimes the welterweight division was 145. Sometimes it was 147. Sometimes it was 142. Okay, so divisions fluctuated in terms of weight, but you also had catch weights in between. Guys used to fight above their weight class. You know, Sugar Ray Robinson fought above welterweight. He fought sometimes at middleweight and he'd come down to welterweight and have a welterweight championship fight because he was actually bigger. He's a big dude, but he could make welterweight. And we got Willie Pep. He used to fight at lightweight, then come back down to featherweight. Okay, but he usually go into lightweight at a kind of catch weight. He'd be more of a super featherweight, right? So that's very important for you to understand. The other thing is, modern day times, we already have these in-between divisions. These you can call them catchweight divisions because they're already in between divisions. And the interesting thing about today's time versus yesteryear's time is today's time, they're no longer same-day weigh-ins. So guys come in a lot bigger on fight night than they actually, their weight class limit says. So you can have welterweights fighting at super featherweight. You know, you can have middleweights fighting at, you know, lightweight. You know what I'm saying? The guys come in big, okay? So it's a totally different picture today as to yesteryear. That's why I said they're bigger, they're stronger, and they're faster than yesterday. These are just facts, okay? And so when you talk about multiple weight classes and divisions, they try to avoid the very thing that's happening today anyway, which is guys coming in, you know, and competing against one another where one has an unfair advantage over the other because one is just significantly bigger than the other. And this happened because even though you had same-day weigh-ins, and I did a video on this, it's same-day weigh-ins, guys would come in still, one guy come in just a whole lot bigger than the other guy. He'd be coming in, like if you have a middleweight fight, a guy would come in as a small welterweight to face a middleweight. So we're talking about, like for instance, Henry Armstrong, he'd come in like 143 pounds. And his competitor would come in 155 pounds. You know, big weight disparities. So they try to avoid that by having in-between weight classes, especially for guys who couldn't make the welterweight limit, but they were still kind of too small for middleweight. So you come in 153 all the time, you just can't make that 147 or that 145. You're somewhere at 153. Okay, since you make 153, let's call this division super welterweight. So now you got a division for yourself. All right, and that happened just a little bit after Sugar Ray Robinson's time, somewhere in the 1960s. All right, and you also had super lightweight that popped up on the scene in between that time, between the 20s and the 50s. We had super welterweight and I think a super featherweight pop up. You know. All right, let's talk about the other thing he's talking about. Ducking. There's no doubt that in the past, the mafia had huge influence in boxing. Fixed fights were undoubtedly predominant. Today, the issue is less diving and more ducking. Boxers today fight each other based on outcome records and would rather take on an easier opponent having multiple losses than one with no losses regardless of the quality of opponent. I don't know where this guy's getting this information from exactly. But he's saying that Kell Brook, Danny Garcia, and Billy Joe Saunders are modern-day examples of ducking and what's wrong with the sport. I really don't understand what he's saying. Kell Brook, first of all, when did he avoid an undefeated fighter? You know, if you look on his record, he has undefeated fighters he fought. And Kell Brook hasn't avoided anyone so far. He's fought everybody he wanted to fight. Amir Khan didn't want to fight him at present. And Kell Brook looks like he's going to be fighting Errol Spence. Where has he ducked anyone? He hasn't ducked anyone. He's fought Gennady Golovkin, for crying out loud. Danny Garcia ducked people. Not that I know of. He didn't rematch Mauricio Herrera to clear the doubt that Mauricio Herrera beat him. But I don't remember him ducking anybody. He fought some subpar stay busy fights. Guys who didn't have no business fighting him. But you can't say he ducked any fighter. Who did he duck? Lucas Matisse with a rematch? Lucas Matisse got knocked out. Guys wanted rematches, but he beat Lucas Matisse fair and square. So I don't understand what they're talking about. Billy Joe Saunders. Yes, Billy Joe Saunders is definitely he's trying to duck Triple G. He even said he's not interested in fighting Triple G. So yes, he clearly is ducking. Okay? It is what it is. But at the end of the day, when we talk about fighters, you need to at least use proper examples, buddy. You know, the truth be told, everybody fought everybody, generally speaking, in the so-called golden era of boxing. But if you're really being fair, if you are accusing Danny Garcia and Kell Brook of ducking, what are you going to say about Sugar Ray Robinson, whose manager said, hey, Charlie Burley's not a good look? We ain't fighting that guy. Call another name. That's a straight up duck. What are you talking about? Alright? I can go on and on and on about guys who ducked guys. Jack Johnson. Yeah, he faced Sam Langford, but he never gave him a chance after that. Never. In fact, Jack Johnson didn't even fight a whole lot of black fighters. But he's a legendary fighter, right? So if you're really going to talk about this, I mean, you need to be consistent, bro. And that's just 6 points, which I just debunked. And here's the joke. When you look at this guy's list of who are the top 10 boxers in history that he has on his list, he got Sugar Ray Robinson at number 1. And a lot of the points he just made, especially the ducking point, we just hit that on the head, right? Sugar Ray Robinson did not. Charlie Burley was presented to Sugar Ray Robinson to face him. Charlie Burley was presented to Henry Armstrong to face him. Okay? Henry Armstrong did not face Charlie Burley. Sugar Ray Robinson did not face Charlie Burley. Okay? We have Sugar Ray Robinson's manager making a statement saying Charlie Burley would be a bad look for Sugar Ray Robinson. And we know what that means because Randy Turpin beat him, and Randy Turpin ain't no Charlie Burley. Ralph Tiger Jones beat him, and Ralph Tiger Jones ain't no Charlie Burley. Okay? Let's go to Henry Armstrong. Henry Armstrong and Harry Crabb, they are considered number 2 in the top 10 boxers in history. We already talked about Henry Armstrong not giving Charlie Burley a shot, right? So ducking applies to him. Harry Crabb was a good fighter, right? Activity and so on. Remind me of an old-time Manny Pacquiao to some degree. But Harry Crabb did not fight a whole bunch of black fighters because we had segregation. So I would have loved to see Harry Crabb, for instance, go up against Sam Langford. They were contemporaries. There was Joe Gans. There was, and all of these guys at some point in time did fight at middleweight. Okay, Joe Gans was known as a career lightweight, but he did move up to middleweight for a little bit. Sam Langford did move up to middleweight. He never fought Harry Crabb. Okay. Now, we can't say explicitly Harry Crabb ducked Sam Langford, right? Because they had segregation laws, but because of the segregation laws, he didn't fight him. So you can't put Harry Crabb up there and then you criticizing, some of the modern fighters today, like Kell Brook, talking about he's ducking, and it's not even true. You can't say that. Willie Pep, number 3. Willie Pep, first of all, was not a guy that lived in the 50s. His fights were from 1950-something to 1960. That's the first point. The second point is, if you're going to put Willie Pep up there with all the rest of the dudes, Willie Pep, you're going to put him up there, knowing that Willie Pep fought, like I said before, a number of bums, but you're going to put him ahead of Muhammad Ali, who fought, if you look at Muhammad Ali's record, his back-to-back fights, he didn't have that much stay busy fights, and he fought a lot of big people in his day. Willie Pep fought some good names, but not on the caliber of Muhammad Ali, man. Come on now. If you're really being real, Joe Gans, definitely a scientist and a pugilist. I give him all the props and respects at lightweight. But then again, Joe Gans came from an era where you got a lot of stay busy fights. So a lot of that record is inflated. Just like Henry Armstrong, just like Sugar Ray Robinson. You look at Jimmy Wild. Same thing. Huge padded record. Alright, Jimmy Wild was in the lower weight class. But you look, he did have, coming down to the end of his career, some really good fights. But I mean, come on now. You fighting a whole bunch of debutantes, man? Come on. I think I showed his record before. I got a video on that, right? You guys go check it out. Sam Langford. I give Sam Langford his props. He fought some good names of his time. But once again, Sam Langford rematched a whole ton of people because he ran out of fighters to fight. Had a lot of stay busy fights. It's just what it is. Benny Leonard, same thing. Benny Leonard got his ass knocked out earlier in his career, beaten up and stuff, but the Ghetto Wizard was the goods. beat a lot of guys. But a lot of guys weren't on the level to really give him any competition anyway. So that's an inflated record as well. Archie Moore fought a lot of guys. Considered the greatest light heavyweight in the world ever. Stayed on top for a very long time. He got longevity. He got skills. He got pedigree. Great competition he faced. Lost to some. George Benton beat his ass. Beat others. Went all the way up to heavyweight. I give him his props. Right? But again, Archie Moore faced a number of rematches with guys he was beating easily, and he had some padding. Sandy Sadler. He's a legend because of Willie Pep. Once again, he beat a lot of people. His record is padded. And, more importantly, who are the other big names that Sandy Sadler beat besides Willie Pep? I'm just saying. Marcel Cerdan. Don't know nothing about that dude, so I can't comment on him. Roberto Duran. We all know his record's padded too. How many times we gotta say this? Roberto Duran really started fighting people when he moved up to higher weight classes. His only real serious competition was Esteban de Jesus and one or two other fighters when he was at lightweight. He don't got a ton of fighters at lightweight that he really fought that was really of competition, that really could have done him something and knock him out. Jack Johnson. Great guy, but he didn't fight a lot of black fighters. The white fighters he had, there weren't no competition for him, but you gotta give him his props for beating legendary guys. Some guys who are all-time greats. He beat them. And he stayed on top. And he was the first black person to do that. So that was completely record-breaking and defining. But again, padded resume. Didn't fight certain fighters of his time. It's just what it is. Didn't give certain fighters rematches. It's what it is. Am I mad at him? No. He beat most of the fighters fair and square. Different time, folks. So, this list does not take into account the evolution of boxing. This list doesn't take into account the level of competition these guys consistently back-to-back faced. This list does not take into account the fact that a lot of these names being said here, when we look at footage of them, are not as fantastic as these historians and so-called aficionados make it sound. Boxing has changed since those times. But some people like to look to the past, and as we say, the nostalgia of it, even though they never lived in the past, and say that it was greater than the present. It's kind of like saying the ABA was greater than the NBA today. Michael Jordan's time is better than LeBron James' time today, and so on. It's not true. You can appreciate the past and what it has brought to the table, not trivialize it, not diminish it, and at the same time you must have a balance to realize and not worship the past and make it sound like it's greater than the present time. The past time has its merits. It was a little bit more primitive than the times now, as laws started to be put in place and boxing started to evolve. The science of boxing has come so far. It's come a long ways from the past. And that's why I have a whole set of videos on this. Because if you don't appreciate the present time, then you cannot truly appreciate the past.